Hey, this is Paul Gilmartin from the Mental Illness Happy Hour, and you are listening to The Soul of Life. And if you happen to turn it off, your life will cease to work. So pay attention. He knows what the fuck he's doing.
I'm Keith Miller. I bring together people who are interested in slowing down to understand how the mind works and how we can live in greater connection to one another in a fast-paced, stressful world. This is The Soul of Life. Hey everyone, welcome back to The Soul of Life. I'm Keith Miller. Today I'm sharing an interview with Zack Berman and Kathryn DeYoung. Zack and Kathryn are two friends and colleagues who went through our ketamine-assisted therapy for clinicians program that we do at Calliope Health, my practice in Maryland. And Zack and Kathryn are able to explain in really interesting detail, and I think they're really funny also, and fun to talk to. They can explain in interesting detail what their experience was like going through and using ketamine for therapeutic purposes, why they did it, how it happened for them, and some of the material that came out of it I think you'll find fascinating and hopefully helpful for your own journey. This is Zack and Kathryn. Hope you enjoy it. Maybe we will start over actually, and just to.
Yeah, you want to ask the snow question again?
Yeah,
I can't repeat anything.
Come on, this question is for everybody.
I know you guys are gonna have heard it before. I'm gonna feel stupid.
No, it's fine.
Ugh, all right.
No, please.
Shut up. Probably not. Not thinking about that.
So Zack Berman and Kathryn DeYoung, thanks for coming on the show here to talk about ketamine. We're going to talk about LSD. We might talk about snow orgasms. We might talk about
an inside joke for all your listeners to figure
for
out.
everyone out there, and we'll let them in on it. And Tim Ferriss has recently said some things about ketamine that because he was a big proponent of it. He's a big proponent of psychedelics. One of the people that has influenced, I think, a lot of others. And he's come out recently and said that he's seen over the last 3 years more of his friends' lives ruined by ketamine than any other drug.
Interesting.
So wanted to take that by the horns today, and then also read some quotes from a Business Insider Journal article. So tell me, why are you here? Like, how do you know each other? And I know you came to our ketamine assisted therapy retreat at Calliope, and I want to hear about your experiences. I was looking forward to this all day. Had some really long, boring meetings, and I was like, it's always going to be great to hear from Zack and Kathryn about what they've gone through while on a trip, because I've heard it a few times. And I'm like, I wish I could record these guys. So tell me how you know each other, or why you're sitting next to each other.
I was going to say the reason why we're here is more of a you question. Like, what's wrong with you? What have you done? We met in our graduate program at University of Maryland in couple and family therapy, and we're fast friends. Very.
I knew before he did.
Yeah. Kathryn was stalking me.
I looked at him. I said, "We're going to be best friends one day."
She did say that to me. It was disturbing. And it's turned out to be true, and I can't decide if it's a spiritual thing or if she's been stalking me the entire time. If it's a single white female situation where she's going to slowly turn into me or something like that. But yeah, we were fast friends there and have remained friends ever since, now that we're out there in the world being professional therapists, couple and family therapists in particular. That's the license type that we operate under. And then I also have just wrapped up my certification for being a sex therapist as well. So I would kind of consider that my, that's like my broad area of interest. But within that, I do a lot of like men's sexual dysfunction. And also I do research. I'm finishing a PhD at University of Maryland also right now. And my research focuses on clinical considerations for working with clients who engage in BDSM and other types of kink practices and non-monogamy. So I'm kind of in that realm professionally, which means I get to have a lot of fun in therapy, talk a lot about dicks and vaginas and sex and people getting tied up and people's emotional reactions to all of that. It's all very engaging and fun.
Tied up physically and then tied up emotionally.
Absolutely.
And who knows what
Absolutely.
other
Although
kinds
some
of ways
people
you
would
could
say that the getting tied up physically is a way to untie yourself emotionally, right? For some people. For other people, it would make it much worse.
you think? Yes,
Yeah. Depends on the context and the consent and everything else, but yeah.
You're very aroused, but it's more like a panic attack.
Right, exactly.
It's different.
My mood is elevated, but in the wrong direction. Yeah.
In the wrong direction. Yeah. All right, so we'll save the snowgasm question for you. But first, I want to hear maybe Kathryn explain herself.
Explain yourself.
Oh no, that's my least favorite thing to do. So we met in graduate school. I am a licensed psychotherapist. I specialize in suicidality, men's mental health, and then I also work at a university as a director of operations of a neuroaffective lab. So I split my time between both research and practice.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So, I guess I'm interested in hearing about your experiences with us in the ketamine experience. What brought you into the clinic to do that? What made it call out to you to offer this? Because just for everybody's knowledge, I've been offering for the past year group experience with ketamine. Everybody gets an injection at the same time. And a way to process time and space to process that as a group afterwards to talk about the experience, especially it's specifically for clinicians, doctors, nurses, social workers, counselors, that sort of thing. So yeah, why did you say yes?
Well, after graduate school, we weren't spending a lot of time together as friends. I mean, we'd talk all the time on the phone and whatnot, but the physical presence wasn't there, and COVID played a role in that, and we're looking for things to do together.
That's true. That was why I was like, I haven't seen you in 2 years. Let's do it.
Wait,
and then
that wasn't not on the application.
No,
right?
it wasn't. But we were in as a pair of friends. We were in that space.
He sent me the flyer, the notice.
Exactly. I got the notice over email from you, Keith, and I thought, that looks exciting. That looks like something we should try. And there's a lot of reasons. I mean, you're going to want to know about this, of course. There's a lot of reasons as like clinicians and professionals underneath that we might be interested in doing that kind of thing. But in the moment, I think the marquee was like, ooh, something exciting for us to do, to do together. Let's go take, psychedelic drugs and see what happens, which, by the way, we could have done any time.
Sure.
Of course. But this seemed like a nice, safe way to do it, number one. And also...
seemed like it was.
Yeah, it was. Definitely was a nice, safe way to do it. And also, that's my dog, by the way, if you hear weird noises. She's walking around. Seemed like a nice way to do it. And also was activating a lot of my sense of interest in the area of like psychedelic assisted therapy, but not really knowing for myself where to begin. Like, I don't know if I want to begin by like going and taking a course or something, or beginning somewhere else, and then it kind of dawned on me when I saw what you were offering and I read what you had written about how this was an experience for bringing therapists and clinicians together to try it. It kind of dawned on me that maybe most obviously the thing I should do first is just try it for myself to see what it even feels like to do it before I decide if I want to continue pursuing a path of like offering that as a clinician, or even just referring people to go and try it, which Kathryn was talking about a minute ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So you wanted some of your own firsthand experiences, but you also just wanted to hang out with Katie. So
yeah.
Yes. Exactly.
All right. So how about for you, Katie? What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think similar. I know I mentioned a little bit earlier that I felt like everyone in our group was fantastic, and we all kind of came with our own different intentions. For me, as I mentioned, I had already kind of done a lot of healing and a lot of exploration with different types of modalities outside of traditional psychotherapy, whether it be, working with Vedic shamans or experimenting with psilocybin. And so I was already kind of in that space of viewing, like being very aware that I'm living in the third dimension and wanting to touch more of the fourth dimension, in a spirit coming from a place of like spirituality. So I was very excited when, like, it didn't take much. She sent it to me and I was absolutely yes. Let's go.
Also, I should mention an interesting difference there is that this was my first psychedelic experience, not Kathryn's. Right. So I was kind of coming at it as I've never really done any psychedelics, not because I have an aversion to it or like a philosophical thing against it. Really, it's like when I was in college and that was all fairly available. I'm a musician as well, so I'm like constantly surrounded by people doing all types of drugs, and certainly back then in college it was everywhere. But I had some job where I was going to get drug tested, so I decided not to do any drugs. And then I kind of held on to that for a while. Some part of me, Keith, you love the parts. So some part of me was holding on to that. I'm not entirely sure why. I think it was partially like a pride that I, was exploring the world without any type of like substances. Besides, I was drinking alcohol at the time as a college student, but even that I stopped doing. So like soon after college, I stopped drinking. So I had been completely sober basically from just after college all the way until I got a huge shot of ketamine in your office. And I was doing it almost, again, it was like a thing for us to do, but, that's partially joke, partially true. But a big part of it was I'm ready to explore this, and now I've got my license to practice. I even supervise other therapists now. I'm looking for new pastures and horizons for myself. And I'm like, at that point, I guess I was 32. It was just last year. So I'm just into my 30s, want to try something new. And so I'm coming at it from a totally different perspective from Kathryn, who's done a lot of exploration, or at least a lot more than me. And another thing that's worth mentioning is in terms of our spiritual kind of orientation. Yeah. Spiritual orientation. Kathryn is, much further down that path. And I'm much further down a different path. I'm not rejecting of spirituality, but I just experience it in a very different way, which we could talk about, I guess. But so we're coming at it from a very different perspective is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. Pedantically.
I get it. So I want to hear about what effect it had on you, because I think a lot of people who are searching for and considering this as a treatment for depression or anxiety or PTSD have, if they haven't had experiences before, they're reading about everyone else's experiences, and there's like concerns about what's going to happen. Am I going to lose control and that sort of thing? And Zach, I don't know if I shared this with you or the group, but my background, I sort of had a puritanical halo around my head as a teenager, and all through college, I studied theology, so that was sort of my excuse to I'm bowing out of this. But so ketamine for me was, besides alcohol, the only, I've never smoked a cigarette, so so yeah, it was the first experience. I was like, well, why not start with something that it's really good purpose for this. So I want to hear about the actual experience itself. What surprised you about it? Maybe if you can recall and go back to the experiences you've had.
I think what surprised me, Zach remembers this part, but I have an anxious temperament, and I remember I was feeling comfortable and confident. I've done things, not this, but like this before, but it was something new. And I felt really good right up till right when I was about to get the shot, and I forget what I said. I looked at Zach and I was like, wait, what about, and I named some sort of medical thing. But once it got started, I was impressed with, I don't know how not scared I was. It was almost like a real sense of, okay, this is happening. Each of the time, I think I've done it with you 4 times now. Each time the first initial part always feels like a fast tumble, like a spill. Thank you. But a controlled spill of almost, the first time was a lot of outpouring of the emotional of feeling love, just love coming out of myself. And feeling really warm. So toppling quickly, but safely. And then a real sense of me feeling like, oh, okay, I've got this. I'm going on a ride, but I'm here. I got my spiritual friends. I'm high-fiving everyone. I'm pouring all this stuff out. And then at one point it kind of shifted, and then there was a part of me kind of receiving a bunch of love. That's where I popped up with the money, love, sex, money, love, sex, money, love, sex mantra, which we can touch on later. But I think I was surprised at how quickly my initial anxiety went away, and how actually in control I felt relative to some of the other experiences I've had.
Yeah, that's interesting. And was this the first time you had tried ketamine?
Yeah.
Zach, how about for you?
Let's see. Like I've two things I want to say about it. I mean, I can tell you at length of the 3 times I've done it in the same setting with you. I had these very intense experiences, and then I wrote about them afterwards and kind of developed stories, helped me to understand and integrate them. We'll probably talk more about the integration piece in a minute, but what the experience was or what it meant to me. But the actual moment of going under, I felt, especially coming from a very sober place, I felt like I needed to use my like mindfulness meditation tools, which I have a lot of experience with from my job, to just be in acceptance of whatever it was that was going to happen. And so I actually don't know from my perspective if it was the drug itself or the medicine that was carrying me away, and how much of, or I should say, in what degree, like how much of it was the ketamine and the medicine itself creating that sense of I'm just going to go with it, and how much of that was me being prepared to be in acceptance of wherever it took me. So I feel like there's maybe some pre-work that would be useful to somebody who's considering this, to learn a little bit about how to be present with their body and their emotions and their experience, and just be accepting of what's there, which is a lifelong thing. You're not going to do like one session of therapy and be like, I'm in acceptance of everything now, and now I'm ready for ketamine. You could probably go hand in hand doing both, but some pre-work on learning how to just be present with the self. And my experience was getting the shot, laying down, and within maybe 2 minutes, starting to feel myself leave my body, become kind of disembodied. And I've had that experience all 3 times that I've done it, kind of leaving my body behind. The imagery that I would associate with it from the first time certainly was the sense of my body being like this big stone automaton, like an ancient temple or something, just lying in the grass, and I'm going off somewhere else. You call it space or another dimension or something else. And then once I'm off in that space, there's kind of a lack of gravity, a lack of sense of center, and there's a lot of warping in my experience with it. And that's sort of and then there's a lot of textures also, I would say, is a really good word that someone mentioned the last time we were doing this, and it really stuck with me. Not so much visuals as like experiencing different types of textures warping around me. And each time there was a different series of images that were associated with different things that, like I said, later on is able to integrate into a story. And then eventually coming down from that back and very slowly back into the body. And then eventually like kind of like opening your eyes or pulling your mask, the eye masks that you gave us, off, and needing a lot of time laying still, because there's sort of a wooziness that comes with taking ketamine. People should be aware of that. This wooziness that comes with the medicine still working through your system. And then within basically 2 hours of getting the shot, being ready to at least have someone drive me home. Not driving myself home, certainly, definitely would not be able to do that. But then also the integration, and then also a lot of the emotion actually not hitting for me until later that night, or especially the last time I did it. I had this really intense journey on the medicine, and then this kind of harder come down for some reason. Just physically, I think I wasn't reacting as well to the wooziness. But then the next day, the whole day, I had a very emotional experience. A lot of different feelings coming up. A lot of like bittersweet, gratitude, different types of things mixing. And that was a very wonderful day, feeling all of that. And I think that's a big part of the experience too, is that time after. So yeah.
Was that the day you sat on the log and cried?
Yeah. So the story with that one is
This is beautiful.
Yeah. The first time when I got back, I went walking around in the woods and with my boyfriend, and then it started raining. And then we were just like walking in the rain, and I was like, this is so amazing. And he's miserable. While we're walking around. I don't know if he was miserable. I shouldn't speak for him, but the dog was happy. She loves getting wet. But then that third time, it was kind of like I was coming down by myself and had sort of a very calm night. But the next day I was walking the dog, and I was walking through the same woods again and listening to some very intentionally put on music that is emotionally triggering. And because I felt like I wanted to let something out. And then those tears are really flowing. And then at some point I found myself just sitting on the log, and the dog is sitting on the log like Kathryn is right here, and just licking my face while I'm
Licking
crying,
the tears off.
licking the tears off me while I was listening to, I don't remember what artist, but yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, I think I like the analogy, like it shakes the snow globe.
Yeah.
It's like you've got stuff that has settled, emotions, experiences, beliefs, and ketamine and other psychedelics allows the brain to sort of play musical chairs with the senses, certainly, and we should talk about what ketamine does specifically, and the sense of sound. But then, like, everything kind of goes up in the air and gets fluffed up, and then it settles in a different place. And that's what we're usually looking for, is like helping people, like you said, Zach, if they don't have the skill already, to help them begin to have a skill of like observing themselves and with just acceptance and compassion without trying to change it, like that meditation, mindfulness skill. And then especially the integration piece, which I'm still working through from what, it's like this big excavator comes. If you do this continually over and over, I think I did 14 infusions at the time when I was really struggling, and like it just excavated so much stuff. And then behavioral changes came out of that, conversations, ending a marriage, huge things that would, I'm still grappling with, like, wow, I'm still trying to make sense of all the pieces.
Yeah.
Most people don't do ketamine for a long period of time, and we'll talk about the limits of it in a second. But I think that's one thing for people to be aware of is that you're going in for a specific window to be opened. And then what can you do with that window? Not to put pressure on you, but it's like, keep doing it until you start learning from the medicine what you need to learn.
I feel like I learned in the first time. I wouldn't even call it a window. I would say it's like busting a wall down. The metaphor I've described to some of my clients when describing the experience to them when they've asked about it, when you're doing therapy or you're practicing meditation, there are oftentimes things that you feel like but it's almost like you're hearing them shouted or even spoken softly through the wall and into like the next apartment or something. And if you do a lot of meditation work and a lot of therapy, you can eventually walk out of your room and walk down the hall and knock on that door and go in there, and it's a whole thing, right? But what I noticed with ketamine is that every time I did it, there was this sensation of like the Kool-Aid man just busting through the wall, and then the next wall and the next wall, to the point where now I'm like looking down the hole all the way through, and I can see the sky outside of the building on the other side. So, and it's not like I couldn't have gotten there a different way, and it's not like those other ways aren't useful still in their own place, but like that, I like what you're saying about the ketamine being a thing you do for a period, or and sometimes, because having that experience of having the wall busted open is now making other things like meditation much more rich, I guess is how I would say it. Yeah, I don't know what you think about that.
I would agree. I mean, I think I was actually just talking to a client today about that, and who's experiencing, some extreme burnout and chronic fatigue and has been depressed for quite some time. And what can happen when you're in that state for so long is like those dendrites, right? Like everything starts to kind of fry. And what that medicine, in my opinion, can do is it kind of just wakes everything up. And it's like, yeah, I don't really know what will happen and what will be said, but what I do know is something is going to start firing, and that's better than nothing. It's going to get something moving so that you can start moving, if that makes sense.
If I could give a tangible example, it would be the first time I did it, and you'll probably remember this because I said this at the time, but first time I did it, I had that sensation of, leaving the body, of warping around, of being in this, in space or some other place. A lot of large, dark shapes kind of flying around, noticing these things. And then the label I applied to the experience after the fact was, oh, I went through some hole and now I'm in the back door of the universe. Right. And I know this sounds like hippy dippy stuff, because if you don't experience it yourself, you think, like, what is this guy talking about? When you experience it for yourself, you will also be at a loss for words and sound like, hippy dippy. Not that that's a bad thing, but just saying, obviously this is me speaking to not being on the same spiritual plane as Kathryn is, but being in that back door of the universe, and this question, which is so universal, of like, what's the point of all of this? That big existential question. Is there a point to all of this, the universe, and having the sensation of the universe answering back and being like, I don't know, I'm also just here. Right. And this is not like a very profound thought in and of itself, because it's something I've heard a million times, something I already knew in a certain sense. But the way it felt to experience that truth while on the medicine hit 10 times harder. And I still, and this was, did we do this in September? Maybe?
Yeah.
September.
It was near my birthday.
Yeah. So even since September, I'm still feeling powerful residuals of that that sense of awareness of something maybe I knew cognitively or could play with cognitively, and even to some degree emotionally. But having it hit the way that it did under the influence of the medicine has made it so much more powerful of an idea in my life. And that's what I mean by that Kool-Aid man thing. Like, I knew that, I could hear that through the wall, but it didn't have the same resonance as it did until after I, did the experience of the medicine, and then was able to kind of integrate what it was I had experienced while I was on it.
So you had already built the road, sort of, so to speak, right, Zach? Like, you had already gone down that road of reflecting about the universe, but then this sort of just pushed it to another level.
It's the difference between intellectually understanding something and emotionally understanding something, and what that means to you. And by the way, it's not like everyone's going to take ketamine and have the same experience, not by a long shot, in terms of you're also going to go to that same back door and have the universe say the same thing to you. It's it's like a carnival ride that you can expect the same thing. No, you're going to see and hear something relative to what it is that you're questioning or wondering about or struggling with. And I didn't even realize going in that was the type of thing that I was concerned about. Maybe having that experience was sending a message to myself that existential concern does drive a lot of my behavior, right? Which I could agree with, upon reflection. So I have that existential experience riding underneath the surface, and the ketamine experience really pulls it up to the surface and says, hey, look at this.
Totally.
Notice this, and notice that you already have the answer for it, right? You've heard the answer. You just needed to feel the answer. And that's what the medicine seems to be able to do for me.
Yeah, I don't think it. I don't think it lets you hide anything. From yourself.
Absolutely.
Whatever it is, the worst fears, terrors, and then, but it does it somewhat gracefully. I think there's moments of sometimes questioning, like, am I okay? I think that's a normal part of any experience that we coach people to expect, because losing control of your body, is going to send some alarm signals to the cortex if it picks up on that, which it does occasionally. But by and large, it's like, as therapists, we're always trying to help people like go through emotions, not around them or bypass them. And ketamine makes you look at things more clearly. Kathryn, what did you think about the role of music?
I think it was the soundtrack to the ride. And I would notice the playlist I put on was the one that you had recommended, and which with each turn of the music or sound, I almost like went into a different place. And so it almost felt like each time it turned, I was looking at a different facet of myself or in a different component. And so I wonder have you ever done it without music?
The nasal ketamine sometimes, but no, like an injection or infusion.
Yeah.
I feel like the music is a comforting guidepost.
Yeah, I can't imagine doing it. And I know some people, which I know we'll talk about later, do this recreationally. I could not imagine doing it without like the intention of taking that time to sit and then go on. I can't think of a better word than it just feels like a ride. And you're just kind of going with the flow. And then that, to your point, like a guidepost, that music just kind of kept moving me around. And this speaks to kind of the spiritual part, but for me, it feels like I am whatever defenses or things that are up go down, and I'm better able to connect to my higher self or, the source. And what has happened on a number of occasions is, I don't know how to, it feels like I'm dancing energetically with other beings or souls. So at the last one, my Aunt Pat came up, and I didn't see her. I didn't hear her. I felt her like spirit energetically. Like I'm incapacitated. I like can't see, but I could feel her. And for whatever reason, it feels like we were dancing. And so during one of the songs, it was just our two spirits being like, "Oh, what's up? You're awesome. Like, I love you so much. This is, you're so great." And that's how I've had that experience with a couple other people in my life during these things where their energy comes in and it feels like I'm physically present, not with themselves in this dimension, but like the max love feeling you could have for that person. And it's hard to describe, but it was very clear that is the person who's in front of me in this space, which I also found really interesting. But anytime the music would change, it's kind of like that dance ended.
Yeah. The music seems to have that conducting sort of ability.
Yeah.
Just want to say,
ketamine,
I can hear the naysayers out there. I can hear my parents. I can imagine my parents.
I mean, I get it.
I can imagine my parents listening to this and being like, "Well, yeah, you saw all of that. You were high on drugs, and I just want to comment because I can feel it. I know people. I know the fingers are typing. They're hot on Yelp right now, saying, this podcast, or not Yelp, but whatever reviewer, but any reviewing place,
Reddit.
but Apple, iTunes, or whatever. But it's like it doesn't matter if Kathryn is actually accessing another dimension or engaging with the spirit of her Aunt Pat or whatever.
She's still alive.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
She's
she's not
she has
dead.
a spirit.
She's not dead, but her energy.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't matter if that's literally happening or not literally happening or somewhere in between. It doesn't really matter because it's the meaning you walk away with from the experience, and that's why we're talking about it also in the realm of mental health. I mean, there are people out there who are doing research, psychodynamic research, I guess you could call it. I read one the other day about they're going to give people DMT in California and London at the same time and see if they can talk to each other.
Oh my God, sign me up. Sign me up.
Which is cool. And I'm like, yes, that's real science, right? If you have a curiosity about the possibility that there's something, abnormal happening there that we don't understand, you should at least test to see if it's true or not. Or they're also going to send people in, and they're going to put them on a drip so that they can stay in for much longer than you normally could be on DMT. I forget the name of the researcher off the top of my head, but they're going to put people on a drip so you can stay under on DMT for a longer period of time, and then see if people will come back with similar maps, because they're going to try to map the realm that you go to under DMT. See if they can map it and come back and compare maps and see if this is actually like a static place or if it's, more quote unquote in your head. But but that's not really mental health so much. I mean, it would influence how we experience it as a mental health intervention. But as a mental health intervention, doesn't matter if you're really in another dimension or if it's just in your head. It's the interpretation of what has happened to you while you were under the influence and what that means to you and how it makes you feel that is important. And the same people who might be sitting out there being like I don't know about this, if you have anxiety and I'm saying that you could have this experience and it might break through that anxiety or depression or whatever it is, it might be worth a consideration, consultation.
Well, I'll say
Keith.
one of the things that started me on this path was a long time ago, in my mid-20s, I was having a lot of panic attacks around like death and dying. And so I ended up doing a deep dive into a lot of the literature that comes from UVA about the researchers who study children who remember past lives, past life regression therapy, all of that kind of stuff. And so there is, if you look for it, there is a lot of good science on some of these things. I would also imagine that the CIA probably did some of that DMT stuff. That they're just reproducing it now on the books.
Exactly.
The answers are there. You just got to dig.
Well, and I think a lot of the researchers have a agnostic view of the subjective user experience. It's more like they're looking at outcomes and thinking of it as sort of unfairly treating people like a bag of chemicals.
Right.
And certainly these medicines have a stimulating effect, and in novel ways that mono treatments don't. Yep. So.
Well, and also just like the funding structure in general is pretty challenging. It's hard to go to the NIH and be like, hey, can I have some funding to study mediums and psychics? Thank you. They're starting to bend a little bit, but
yeah.
The LSD news that's interesting. So I mean, so much is happening so quickly with this. Ketamine was approved in 2019, and with the form that we're using, or that clinics like ours use, injectable ketamine, is not approved by the FDA. And I think that actually holds a lot of people back. There was Matthew Perry a few months ago who died in a bathtub, in a hot tub, with a whole bunch of other things wrong with him, right? He had severe cardiac disease and was abusing a lot of different drugs and had abused a lot of different drugs, but he had recently been treated in a ketamine clinic. And so I think everyone collectively who works on the front lines like we do with ketamine and these psychedelic medicines held their breath, and like we're waiting for people to continue to sort of like explore this. But if you dip below the headlines that were, I think, poorly written about Matthew Perry to exploit people's interest in ketamine as a news story, it's pretty easy to find the legitimacy of this. The FDA probably will approve injectable ketamine, which will just help with more endorsement, more trust.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. The poorly written headlines trying to grab attention, not really profit motivated, as opposed to thinking about the long-term consequences of that kind of stuff. When we've just been through 50 years or something of real struggle to get back to where we were towards the end of the 60s in terms of researching psychedelics, right? Because the whole drug scheduling that happened under Nixon in 1971 or 70, around then.
70s, yeah.
Yeah, which was, again, totally politically motivated. It wasn't really about actual fear about the drugs. It was politically motivated for a lot of reasons. You can go to Wikipedia and Google. Want to turn your audience into people who are informing themselves.
The book Acid Test is a great history, the serpentine history of psychedelics and drugs. And now we're seeing law enforcement communities who used to police disproportionately black and brown neighborhoods for drug abuse, and let cocaine use go off, scot-free. And those law enforcement same people are actually realizing that police officers die from their own guns more than any other form of death, self-inflicted. And this is one of the things that stops it. So I think it's compelling. It's really compelling.
It's always cool when you find the angle, right? Like I saw something with, I think it was Vice. They were doing interviews about I think it was about MDMA, but it might have been about that and psilocybin or a couple other things. But they were doing a video documentary thing about it, and they were asking Rick Perry about it, famous like Republican former governor of Texas, right? And they were asking him, how does he think about it? He's like, well, I hear that it helps the troops, so I'm pro, exploring it. And they said, and I think they asked him, I might be wrong, so fact check me if you're out there and you're listening, but I think they asked him in the video if he would ever try it, and he said maybe I'd be open to it. Like it's all about the right, all about the right political motive, right?
Mm-hmm.
If
there's an alignment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Rick Doblin and the MAPS Public Benefit Corporation did a huge service by strategically targeting veterans and service members as the population that would be first in line to get this treatment.
For sure.
As there's a huge amount of sympathy for those people. Mm-hmm. The article I'll put in the show notes is from fastcompany.com. It's titled Psychedelic News, the government finally fast-tracked LSD as an anxiety treatment. It's a company called MindMed, the first publicly traded pharmaceutical company focused on psychedelics. And they have been working in a project that they nicknamed Project Lucy, cleverly. Starting in 2020, therapists would administer these experiential doses of LSD to patients suffering from anxiety. And by that point, the article says the FDA had already said okay to human trials for psilocybin. MDMA is, we think that we're going to be able to use MDMA. Our psychiatric nurse practitioner will be prescribing it possibly next winter. We don't know, but the FDA is scheduled or announced that it will approve it in August. And then the DEA has 90 days to reschedule it. So that puts us somewhere in the winter. And it's not clear what the guidelines are going to be, but there seems to be some mandate that it will be done in a clinic and people will have to stay in the clinic. You can't.
Is this company who's profiting from the drug providing any guidance on the training for the clinicians who are supposed to be administering it, or is that the cost of that on the onus of the provider?
That's a good question. At least the way my understanding of how MAPS is handling it is that MAPS has come up with a lot of guidelines and training for therapists, but they're not asking the FDA, or the FDA is not willing to include those guidances firmly. So other than saying this has to be a licensed therapist, it has to be in the clinic, not at home, for example.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah.
My first question is, when's that therapist retreat going to be?
Yeah. Well, you'll be one of the first to know.
Awesome.
And I think we should talk about the other side of it, because a lot of people in the ketamine community, I'll say kind of globally, it's just my opinion, ketamine as clinicians, the community of clinicians nationwide, when Matthew Perry died, I read a lot of very defensive comments, and I felt like I felt sad by the way it was being reported, because people were not getting the whole story. Some people were just reading the headline and saying, "Oh, this is dangerous." But there are dangers and there are risks, and we don't know a hell of a lot about why it works and how it works. Mm-hmm. So I think that's just common sense to be humble about that.
Well, I think that's true, right, of any drug. I mean, someone can take Prozac and that can induce like a manic episode, depending on your body chemistry. So I think all medications come with a risk for some people.
I think a big part of it also has to, I think this is why Kathryn's question about training was so important. Yeah. A big part of it has to do with collecting data on what the best way to administer it is, because our experience in the clinic with the doctor and with the nurse practitioner, I think a different time was who it was. But our experience in the clinic, in that surrounding, like having someone be watching over us and giving us also pre-work to do before we actually experiment with it, all of that scaffolding was really helpful for building into the experience. And obviously it helps that we're all clinicians, and we have a lot of pre-work that we're just already having done. But meanwhile, there are other things I've heard about people getting, something from a ketamine clinic and then just going home and there's no scaffolding at all. Or even some situations I've heard about, people get prescribed it and then it gets like mailed to their house and they take it on their own. And I had a client who was doing that, and then someone else in the family tried to use the ketamine for like an overdose on purpose for like a suicide attempt. Didn't die, but had what sounded like probably the most horrible experience of their life. Because what I heard from the doctor was that you can't necessarily die from that, like the way that it was administered. But what happened instead was like totally locked down for like 24 hours on the overdose, and then had another 24 hours of like muscles being strained and locked from the drug. And it sounded like the most painful experience.
Yeah.
So long story short, there is that there are ways of giving out the medicine. There are ways of administering the medicine. There is ways of scaffolding the experience with the medicine that makes it much more safe, right? But as you're saying, there's always risks, but makes it much more safe and much more effective. And then there's other ways of handing it out where, again, you get that profit motive thing of like, oh, if we could figure out a way to just mail people ketamine and people are excited about ketamine, then we'll just mail it out. And then you get situations like the one I just described, which is scary and uncomfortable and not healthy.
What else would you like to talk about? Anything else you think people should know about if they're considering this as a treatment?
I mean, I think the biggest thing that I mentioned it before about like integration, I think having a plan for, first of all, maybe having a definition for what integration is for yourself if you're planning on doing this, and then having a plan for how you're going to do that is really crucial, because we did like group integration after we were done. Like we had a space for quite a while to talk about what that experience was like as we were still coming down off the medicine. And that was helpful for me to begin integrating, as we sort of suggested before. You're still integrating, and you're years later, right? Or however long it's been. And, probably the most helpful integration practice for myself was after the, let's see, every night after I've done ketamine, I ended up typing out to some of my close friends specifically what I had experienced. And it was essentially journaling. I was more motivated to do it because I wanted to be like, and then this happened. But I journaled right after, like while I was still on the medicine, I was coming down, I was writing stuff down that I had seen and experienced. And those notes are very interesting to read back. But then later that same day, I was writing out in detail to my friends what had happened, which was acting like a journal. And in doing that, that was when I developed the narrative that best helped me to understand what it was I experienced all 3 times. And I can tell you, like like that first time, it was pretty clear. I came down with that sense of, oh, like the universe doesn't know either. I'm not missing any big secret. We're just here. I felt that. The second time I did it, though, it was a much more opaque, uncertain kind of experience. And I really didn't know what I was walking away with. And I felt kind of frustrated with the experience also, because there was a lot of anxiety during the trip. But then the act of writing it out later and trying to explain what had happened forced me to come to some deeper awareness of what the experience had been, which, by the way, is not any different than processing something in therapy, right? Like any event that happened when you're not under the influence of medicine, just something happened and I don't know what to think about it. And so I talk about it or write about it and I come to a better understanding of what it means to me. Same exact thing, just about this ketamine experience. And I was able to realize, actually there was a deep insight, a very deep insight for me to take away from that more frustrating second experience, right? And then the third time, same thing as sort of a mix of the two. The third time it was this weird mix of opaque and kind of clear, but then writing about it afterwards helped me to realize, there was a big takeaway from that experience that has stuck with me ever since. It was very powerful. It involved monkeys, if you'll remember. Like in brief, it was there was a tension in. I was more comfortable with the experience, so I knew what to expect. As soon as I get the shot, it'll be about 1 minute to 3 before I'm like into the disembodied experience, or at least going up to the top of the ride. And so I felt a lot of joy initially, and then there was this anxious piece, which had been the main character in the second trip, coming back in and being like, no, you should be anxious about stuff. And the joy and the anxiety were in a push-pull back and forth for quite a bit. And then towards the end of the trip, as I was coming down and I was starting to notice the music again, because in my experience, the music sets the stage, then kind of goes away, then kind of comes back at the end, which is funny that it shapes it for you, because I'm a musician and yet
you're not getting anything.
I'm not really getting as much from the music. But when I was just at the edge of coming back down, there was this like sensation of, we would call it sacred geometry kind of stuff happening, just like lots of shapes and mixing together. And I found myself busting, and that was part of the representation of my dog's getting tied up in my wire here. That was part of the representation of the anxiety. It was like this cold, desolate, sacred geometry thing happening far off at the end of the universe, dead, desolate. And I found myself busting through that suddenly into this almost like a jungle or a forest, or at least the sensation of a jungle or a forest. And there were monkeys in the trees, and they were like, you can just relax, right? You can just hang out with us and enjoy the breeze. And it wasn't until I was writing that out later in the day I realized, oh, this was like me taking a shot of my own medicine in terms of teaching other people how to use meditation and mindfulness to really embrace presence. That now I was having this like more cosmic experience of the monkeys coming in and being like, you're allowed to think about these existential questions, and you should, and it's good for you, but also you're allowed to put that down and just enjoy the breeze. And it was because of the writing about it that clarity came to me. And that was well after I came down off the medicine, still same weekend. And then that led into the emotions the next day. So I think having that integration plan, that's what works for me apparently, but thinking about that in advance, so that you, as someone who's listening to this might be considering doing this, thinking about, and Keith, you're really good at making sure we think about this. You like talked about this extensively when we did this all 3 times, thinking about what you're going to actually do after you come down off this medicine. Yeah. What are you going to eat? Who are you going to have sex with?
Mexican food, always.
yeah. Let's all plan now who you're going to have sex with first. Let's just get that clear.
Yeah.
Mexican food. Yeah. Oh yeah. Eating becomes very like, of course you can't eat for 4 or 6 hours before. So you're pretty hungry when you come out. It feels great, to find food. Right.
And really it's the most basic foods. Like the Mexican food was really good, but the stuff that was really blowing my mind was, seltzer water.
Yes. Yeah.
Really, which Keith gave me this. I think the second time was when I had the seltzer water moment. Yeah.
The bubbles have a nice. They're just 100,000 times more interesting.
Yes.
Kathryn, you also came out of one of the experiences with a mantra. Like, can you talk about what that was? Because it sounded like
a mantra for each one. Which one?
Which one? The money love sex. Money love sex.
Yeah, it was like money love sex. It was. I really wonder what it would be like if I had done this experiment or experience a year earlier when I was in the thick of it, versus when I was in a really good place. Because it was like I mentioned, it was a tumble. It was an outpouring of love, just unconditional love pouring out of me and going into everyone in my life and everywhere. And then there was this recognition all of a sudden where I paused and I thought, hey, I want some of that. And it was almost like the physical sensation of it, and then that's where, for whatever reason, it was money, love, sex. And I felt very spiritually hungry. And I think, I don't want to speak for all clinicians, but in general, people who skew to this field tend to be people who do like pouring out or compassion and loving and helping. And sometimes, at least I can think for me, there's in my background, maybe something that feels guilty about wanting. And in that experience for me, something just kind of shifted. And I think it was the medicine, but also the time in which I was doing it just kind of coming together. And for me, it felt less mind-blowing, but more solidifying where I was, and more of a like you're getting it. and that it's okay to want things, and it's okay to want to make money, or, you know, and be financially secure, or, you know, want to have sex or be loved and those sorts of things. And so all I remember was waking up and kind of like rolling over, and I have the paper over here, like, and writing like money, but it took me 3 times to do it because my motor skills were not ideal. And then I was just laying there waiting for Zach to turn over so I could show him my sign. I was like, this is what I learned. Yeah, but I don't know.
Yeah.
That was definitely the second time you weren't there. And for whatever reason, I think when it happened, I was just thinking, oh, Zach's not here. And like I said, each time was a tumble. So I was like, oh, Zach's not here. Zack, zaddy, daddy. And then I went into a whole daddy and energy exploration phase to explore dad issues, which is extra funny because I always tell Zack that he was my dad in a past life. He doesn't believe me. But
Yes. Our ongoing joke is that we died in a past life in France picking an unexploded shell out of the ground from World War I. And that's where our bodies lay. And if we went back there'd probably be something mystical that would happen. That's the joke. It's funny that zaddy daddy thing.
Yeah,
people describe my therapy style as rabbinical.
That was me. That was me who did that.
Kathryn described it that way.
People.
A lot of people.
Everyone.
Yeah. Well, hey, this has been great. I think it's just helpful to have more people contribute to sort of the encyclopedia of what it's like, because it is so different for so many people, and it's not for everyone. I want to make that clear. I don't think everybody should go do ketamine. No. But you know, if you're struggling with a mood disorder, or struggling with feeling like life has no meaning, right? Or anxiety, this is one of the most clearest, fastest ways that we know that can fast track and accelerate your therapy. And I'd like to put it that way. I don't think it necessarily does anything for you other than what you might be ready to do yourself.
Yeah,
sure.
And I think the things that you both talked about today kind of exemplify that. So appreciate getting to know you guys and having you here.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you.
I like it, and it's not harsh to my eardrum.
All right, I will go.